After teaching a ton of people how to use their Holley EFI systems, I found that most new users either get stuck or get frustrated with the same things. Let's take a look at some of those things that are driving you guys nuts and show you how to not become so frustrated. The very first thing right out of the box, and this isn't specific to Holley, this happens whether you buy a camera or a TV or basically anything electronic, but when you first open the box and you install the stuff, everybody gets frustrated that depending on where you bought your system, how long it's been sitting on the shelf, and a bunch of other things, a lot of times the system will actually need to be updated when you first get it before you can even use it. So just be aware that that is normal and is something that you might have to do. And that kind of leads us into the next thing, is that a lot of people kind of don't understand that the ECU has its own firmware and then the laptop has its own software. And then whether you're using a 3.5-inch touchscreen, a 5-inch touchscreen, or Pro Dash or a 7-inch dash, that will also have its own firmware. And in order for all of these things to work and communicate together, the firmwares and softwares, they all must match. One thing that is both good and bad about Holley is they tend to only kind of keep the newest version of softwares and firmwares on their website. So a lot of times it makes it easy. If you just go and download all of the newest stuff and install it, then everything usually will work together. There's a little bit of a downside if you wanted an older version of software or something like that, but that's something for another day. So let me show you where you find all of this stuff on their website. So once you get to Holley's website, you just go to support. And the other thing that's nice is all these softwares and firmwares are free. And then we're going to go to fuel injection, and then you're going to want to click on whichever system it is that you're using. So if you're using like a HP and a Dominator, you can see here we have the software and firmware and all of the stuff that you're going to need. And for this particular one, they do have some of the older versions. So some they do, some they don't. But either way, you got to make sure that, again, all of your firmwares and softwares, they all match between all of the different devices that you're trying to use all at the same time. And you'll typically know if that's not happening because, your ECU and your laptop might be communicating together, but your touchscreen display or something like that might not be. So just something to be aware of. All right, the absolute number one beginner question is always, what do all of these colors mean when they're looking at the main fuel table? And a lot of people try and look way too deep into this. The colors are adjustable if you do want to adjust them for whatever reason. I don't know anybody that does that. The default colors seem to be just fine for everybody. But let me show you real quick. Really, the colors are almost like a visual safety net. This here is the Sniper software, and right away you can see up here that these cells don't have any colors. That means that we're over 100% duty cycle. So again, this is just like a visual warning. And you can see here that the colors change as the numbers increase and decrease. So if we go over here where it's purple, which in this particular instance means that these numbers are higher than everything else. If we just put a number of, I don't know, say in there, now you can see that these are the lowest numbers. And you can see that really, really quick, you can just tell that you have a problem right here. So if you had 5% VE up here, you're going to run into a severe lean problem. And then if you go into the fuel graph, it kind of just, again, is a visual representation showing you that those numbers that you have in the table are not where you want them to be. So don't look too deep into the colors. You can just see that they'll kind of change depending on if they're the highest or lowest values on the table at that given time. Now, the biggest beginner issue that anybody has whenever you're trying to learn anything is not knowing enough to know what you don't know. So one of the best things that you can do is just simply read and absorb as much information about this stuff as you can. So I'll leave a link in the description to a Facebook group simply called Holley EFI for Beginners. So join that group, read everybody else's questions, read the answers, ask your own questions. You'd be amazed how much something like this will help you even kind of before you get started and even connect your laptop to your car for the first time. And on that note, even if you have not bought or installed your Holley EFI system yet, I would encourage you to go to Holley's website and download the software for whichever system it is that you're thinking about buying or that you do have or whatever. The more that you can just sit at your living room table and navigate through the software and just familiarize yourself with what's what, where it is and all that, it's just going to make your life so much easier when you're actually sitting in the car trying to get started tuning and you're not fumbling around like wondering where everything is. And the last thing before we move on, I've made a whole bunch of PDF files that I email based on different trainings. Like we have a 8-step roadmap for tuning your first car with Holley. If you've never used the system before, it'll kind of walk you through my step-by-step process on how I do that. We have another one that's properly understanding your idle control and how all of that works. We have some lists of different helpful websites on things that are Holley EFI specific, and all of that stuff is 100% free. So again, there'll be a link in the description. You can go there, sign up for that, and then I can start emailing you all of this stuff. Next issue I see a bunch of people have, and I feel like a broken record saying this over and over again, but a lot of people think that this system is self-tuning, or even if you're relying on the little 3.5-inch handheld to make your tuning adjustments, you're just kind of setting yourself up for disappointment or failure. The way I look at it is you've paid money for the entire ECU, so you might as well use the entire ECU. Now it is a bit unfortunate that you will need a USB to CAN cable, which is not included with a majority of the kits, which I absolutely agree with you that it sucks that it's not included. But at the end of the day, modifying these cars is very expensive. It's a super expensive hobby to have. So you've paid so much money to get to this point. Buying this cable for less than $100 isn't going to kill you, and it's going to make your experience so much better. All right, this next one is super frustrating for a lot of guys because it ultimately ends up in having to rewire things twice. But if you buy the input and output extension harness. Let's see, I'll pull up the part number real quick. All right, so this here is the J1A and B input output auxiliary harness, part number 558-400. And you can see here that this is showing that it can be configured as both 12 volt or ground outputs. However, if you are using a Terminator X, you do not have the option for 12 volt outputs or PWM positive outputs. You only have ground outputs and PWM negative outputs. So a lot of guys get confused by this. You know, they bought this harness because it will work with either system. It's just you're not able to configure it for the 12 volt outputs on the Terminator X. And I think a big part of the confusion here, it actually is showing here that we have like thermistor. This is clearly just like a harness that this documentation is made for the HPs and Dominators, but the harness still works for the Terminator X's. And you can see here that this was last edited, you know, back around the time of Vietnam. So it makes sense why Terminator X wasn't even available then. So it would be nice to see Holley update this documentation, or at least have a different part number for the Terminator X and for the HPs and Dominators to eliminate this confusion. So, but anyways, familiarizing yourself with this ahead of time is going to prevent you from having to wire all of your outputs twice. And speaking of the inputs and outputs, for those of you who are using the CAN expander, when you go to wire the expander, a lot of people don't seem to know this, but be aware that you cannot use the expander to do things that are already predefined in the software, like boost control, for example. So that expander module, you're going to have to set everything up as a custom input and a custom output only. If you were to try to wire it for your boost control, for example, since those things are already predefined in the software, it's just not going to work. It's not going to give you the option to use the expander for those. I see this one on the dyno all the time. Guys will come with it wired up all nice and pretty and fancy, and then just to find out that the way that they wired it to the expander isn't going to work and it's going to have to be redone. So again, if you're using the CAN expander, only use that for custom inputs and custom outputs and not something that's predefined in the software. It's going to fight you, and you're not going to be able to do what you want to do. So next, if we are speaking of boost control, I thought this was super kind of weird and annoying on the very first car that I personally tuned with Holley EFI. When you enable CO2 based boost control, it actually populates the boost control solenoids for you. However, you still have to set up a custom input for the dome pressure sensor. Here, let me show you what I mean. So if you're here within the boost control ICF and you have this set up for dual solenoids or whatever, if you go to the pin map and we go to outputs, you can see here that it's just predefined these solenoids for us, which is nice. However, in order to wire up the dome pressure sensor or to configure that, we have to go to inputs and outputs, and then you actually have to set this up as a custom sensor. And then when you go to the pin map, you can see here that we have dome pressure as a sensor. But you would sure think that if it's going to populate the solenoids for you within the boost control software, you would think that somewhere within this setup that even, especially here, because we have the dome pressure input, like you would think that you would just configure this sensor here and it would, you know, ask you for the configuration of the sensor, but that's not the case. So I know the first time, again, I was trying to set up a dome pressure sensor, I was looking around through all of these boost control tabs on like, where do I do that? But you have to set it up as a custom input. And then after it's a custom input, then you can, you know, choose your dome pressure input right here. So if you've never used Holley before, that can be a little bit weird. And while we're still on the topic of boost control, and rightfully so, everybody seems blown away to find out that Holley does not have map-based closed loop boost control. Actually, I have a boost control PDF that's about halfway done, explaining all of the pros and cons of all the different boost control options with Holley. So like I mentioned before, if you click on that link, I can email you all of that stuff as well. So anyways, CO2-based dome control is arguably the best form of boost control, especially for drag racing, but but I feel like there's a lot of scenarios where dome pressure control wouldn't be my preferred method of boost control. Most street cars, for example, I would take a closed loop map-based boost control over CO2-based dome pressure control any day of the week. But on a drag car, I would take the CO2-based. But what's even crazier than that is that the snipers don't have the option to run open loop single solenoid boost control. So a lot of people freak out thinking that they absolutely have to have closed loop control, as the single solenoid open loop method works extremely well, but having a little bit of feedback in a closed loop system would be ideal. But I do wish that they would have at least a single solenoid operation for the snipers. Now, my only guess as to why they don't have map-based closed loop boost control is it would just be a tech support nightmare, as it's a lot harder to set up than CO2-based control, especially since with the CO2-based control, you can do it with the, just turn the ignition on in the car, sitting in your garage or in your driveway. You don't even have to actually drive it. As to where for people trying to set up closed loop boost control for the first time while they're ripping their car up and down the road or whatever, you enter one value wrong and the thing overboosts like crazy, and it can be a lot more difficult to set up. There's a lot more kind of moving targets, so to speak, with the closed loop control. So that's my only guess as to why they don't do it. It would be nice if they did do it though. So again, just if you haven't bought your Holley system yet, just be aware that it does not have that, or even if you do have your Holley system and you can't find it, that's the reason why, is it's not there. All right, the next thing people get super confused about was when it appears that their software just doesn't have all of the same options that they know that it should, or that they see in other people's tune files, and that's an easy fix. So let me show you how to do that real quick. This is the same for all the softwares. We'll just do it here in the Sniper software. But if you go up to the top, you can see here we don't have boost control, we don't have inputs and outputs. There's a bunch of stuff that's just missing. So if we just go to Toolbox, add individual configuration, here is all of the things that you were looking for. So if you wanted to add boost, for example, you just double click on that and click on default. And now you can see here, this is where our boost control option is, and same thing. And with the Sniper, there's some different ones that are already just like right here. So if you want a nitrous, you could click on that. Oh, and it just brings you here to this folder anyways. That's a waste of time. And we wanted to do the advanced tables. The advanced one gives you a warning saying that you can get yourself into trouble if you don't know what you're doing. And here's our advanced tables ICF. So easy fix. If you're missing stuff, that's where it is. Now for the forced induction guys, they always seem to get confused on KPA versus boost, and both for like the axes in the tables, and then also when viewing the real-time data or in the data log. So let me show you how to fix that real quick too. If we look at this file here, you can see that our map is actually in KPA. A lot of people don't like working in KPA. So again, easy fix. Let's go to Toolbox, Preferences, and then we click on this Display Map as PSIG. Click OK, and now we have vacuum and we have boost. Same things that go for the display down here. If we click on Edit the Views, if we put Map down here, regardless of what we chose in our preferences, map is always going to show you the KPA. And if we come over here and we grab boost PSIG, now this is going to display vacuum and boost like our axis in the table did. Click OK, click Save, and now we have map and KPA, boost PSI, which is going to be vacuum and positive manifold pressure. So one thing that's nice about having both KPA and boost is if you pull up both of these channels and you just kind of keep an eye on them over time, even if your brain doesn't really work in KPA, you can kind of start getting the hang of it. So you can see here, anything less than 100 KPA is in vacuum, and anything above 100 KPA is positive pressure. Okay, for you Sniper guys that are not using timing control, I think every one of you gets freaked out when you have the software open and running and you see that the timing numbers are moving around. Don't worry, the ECU is just showing you what it would be doing if you did have the timing control wired up and enabled. It would probably save a lot of people from having heart attacks if Holley had, maybe some sort of a checkbox that said, I'm not using timing control. Or here, let's look at the software real quick. So here in our Sniper software, if we go to the system ICF for ignition here, if you're not using the timing control, like it doesn't really matter what you click on because it's not wired up. It can't work if it's not wired. But it would be nice if they had a drop down here that just said like no timing control or something. Because if we go into, like if this car was running, you would see that the base timing and the ignition timing right here, these values wouldn't be zero, they would be populated, and wherever the engine was running based off of, however you have your table set up here. So if the car was idling, it would be showing that you're somewhere around 15 degrees. But again, that's just what the ECU would be outputting if you had it wired up. So again, don't freak out if it's showing some values values there. It's just going to show you what it would be doing if you did have it wired. Okay, this one doesn't apply to snipers as they only give you the option for a volumetric efficiency. But for everybody else, there's some confusion between speed density and volumetric efficiency. Unlike some other ECUs where speed density might mean something like a totally different control strategy altogether, with Holley it's pretty black and white. If you want your fuel table to be set up in units of fuel flow in pounds per hour, then you would just simply choose speed density. And if you want to use volumetric efficiency, then you would choose VE. And you'll find this here under the system ICF. For the load sensing, we have speed density, VE based, and there's some other combination options, but speed density and VE based are without a doubt the two most popular. So you can see if we go to speed density, it's going to ask us if we want it to update the actual fuel table for us. And you can click yes, that's fine. Just be aware that when you do this, the conversion doesn't always work out perfectly. So always double check. Sometimes the numbers just won't be 100% accurate. It'd be like as close as it can get it doing the conversion. But other times it just like wigs out and puts like crazy values in there. So we'll click yes. But if we go to our fuel table now, you can see here up at the top that our fuel table is in pounds per hour of fuel flow. And if we go back, switch this to VE based, click yes, yes. Go back. Well, here's exactly what I was talking about. You can see here down this bottom row giving us this crazy 99999 thing. So the whole table is red and it's just kind of a mess. So just be aware. Sometimes if you just copy and paste this bottom row here, it'll sort of save you. And you can see there that for the most part, it kind of brought this table back. Again, looking at our colors, you can see there's something sort of weird going on here. I don't know. This is just one of the default Holley tunes. This fuel table's kind of weird looking. So just be aware that when you do that conversion, sometimes that will do some weird stuff like I just showed you. Now, it does not matter which of these load sensing types that you use. I personally prefer volumetric efficiency, and I've made an entire video explaining why that is. Some people prefer to work in pounds per hour, and if that's the case, it'll work just fine. So don't stress too hard over choosing which one of these options that you want. If you'd like to know more about it, go find the video I did on it. I personally just find that volumetric efficiency is a lot easier to work in, and the fuel tables can kind of transfer from car and setup a lot easier in my opinion. But I'm sure there's people that have been using pounds per hour for a really long time and they prefer that method, which is totally fine. All right, the next thing that we have is sometimes watching how people are viewing their data logs is actually painful to watch. Let me show you 4 quick things, just even these themselves. If you're not doing any of these things, it'll make your life a whole lot better. Okay, so this is kind of like the default view, which I don't know, I don't see how anybody could tolerate looking at this like this. So you can toggle channels off entirely by clicking on this top checkbox. But the first thing that I do is I uncheck the bottom of the 2 checkboxes on all of the channels to get rid of these stupid white bars here. I hate these things. They just take up space on the screen. So I don't want to look at those. The next thing is that if you click on this E, you have all of these different, I guess you could almost call them like kind of like folders. But if you click the X, it'll clear all of the channels out of that folder, and then you can just drag and drop whatever channels it is that you want to view. So if you only want to look at 2 things at a time so that your chart isn't overloaded with stuff, you can do it that way. And then if you just click OK, save, and then you go to the view that you just had. Ultimately, you probably want to name it for whatever it is that you're doing, but you can see how much cleaner this is, and even cleaner if we get rid of these stupid white things. Sometimes it's maybe like if you're using RPM, you can leave one of these up to give you something to kind of use as a reference point. But all right, now the next thing is you can see here that our fuel flow is really low down here. Well, basically everything is really low down here at the bottom of the screen. So again, we're only using maybe 1/3 of the real estate that we have available. So you can actually just rescale these values. So if we click on this, we can see that our fuel flow is 171, but we're scaled to 600. So like, let's scale this to 225. Now you can see that this is a lot more kind of, in my opinion, easier to see what's going on, gives you a lot more resolution. And the last thing I got for you here, for the love of God, please know that you can zoom in. So we see guys trying to view a 45-minute long data log zoomed all the way out, and you can't see anything. So if you just simply left click on your mouse and drag it, you can zoom all the way in, and it just really gives you the ability to see what you want. And sometimes you might find that you zoomed in too much. You can just click on these things and it will kind of go back and forth for you. Go like that. And then this L is the last, so it's just the way that you had it right before. But you can see that's going to make it so much easier for you to review your data and be able to make changes that you need to based off of that. So another mistake I see a lot of people making is that they don't understand that the actual fuel correction is what the learn table is doing plus what the closed loop correction is doing. So I'll see a lot of times where guys will have a learn table that has, maybe 30, 40% in the learn table. And as a result of there being so much correction in the learn table, the actual closed loop correction is only now having to show like a 2 or 3% correction or whatever. So at that point, they think that the tune is within that 2 or 3% and they think that they're good. But the reality of it is once you factor in what the learn table is doing, plus what the closed loop is doing, you think it's good, but you're actually all the way out in left field. A 43% correction means that the tune is nowhere close and you have a whole lot of work to do. So understand that it is your learn correction plus your closed loop correction is the overall fuel correction. And this is the number that we want to try and get as close to 0 as we can. Okay, this one is worth its own entire video, but another huge mistake that I see guys making, and this doesn't apply to sniper users as you don't have this option anyways, but people think that they're going to be able to use the knock sensors and the Holley knock control in order to tune their ignition timing like you would in like a factory ECU car, like with HP tuners, for example. But it's an entirely different animal altogether. I would say that if the engine is already tuned safely and efficiently and properly, at that point, maybe you could use the Holley knock control to pick up some knock and remove some timing based off of that. But if you're trying to do it the other way around and actually use the knock sensors from the get-go to figure out what your ignition timing value wants to be, you're going to be in for a really rough time. On a standalone system like this, you're actually going to have to essentially tune and calibrate the knock sensors before you can use them, in which case, in order to do that, you need to have a very good understanding on how to actually tune the ignition timing. So again, if you're going to try and use those knock sensors to figure out what your timing value should be, it's not going to work out very well for you. And I'll try and be as politically correct as I can when I say this, but in my opinion, the Holley knock control is not very good. There just simply is not enough stuff there. There's not enough adjustability. There isn't a definable threshold. There's just a couple of values. I think you can change the frequency and the sensitivity. I think using a dyno, using an external knock monitor, using, reading spark plugs or anything along the lines of that is going to give you a far better outcome of picking what your ignition timing values are than trying to use the Holley knock control. Other people's experiences may be different than mine when it comes to that, but I don't know. I don't use Holley's knock control, and unless they revamp all of it, I probably never will. All right, this one's a super easy fix. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that like super frustrated that there isn't an undo feature within Holley, but there actually is. Not within the Holley software. It's actually the Windows command, but it still works. So let me show you how we do this real quick. So you can see how and why guys would get frustrated. Let's just say you spent a week dialing in this whole table and you got it perfect, and you wanted to, add 5% of fuel right here for whatever reason, and you accidentally just changed everything to 5. You can see why you would freak out and be like, I want it to go back, but you don't know how to do it. So if we just simply hold down Control and press Z, you can see it went right back to the way that it was. So yeah, undo is super easy. Just be aware that in some of the other tables, like probably like in like the system ICF and some of the like more core settings, sometimes the Control Z won't work. But usually in those situations, the only time you really need the undo is in those big, huge tables that can be really tedious to repair them when you break them. Now, a lot of guys get super intimidated with this whole process because they don't have a lot of computer knowledge, and they'll do something as simple as like save a data log or save a global file, and then they can't ever find it again. So when it comes to computer knowledge, the number one thing that you need to be able to do is navigate the file explorer. So let me show you how to do that real quick, and then this is also going to show you every time you save a file where it goes. So depending on what version of Windows you're using, there's usually this folder looking thing down here that you can click on, which is your file explorer. If you don't see that, if you go to the search and you just type in file explorer, you can click on that. And a little bit unique to Holley is you wouldn't think that the folders and stuff would be in documents, but that's where they hide them. So if you go to documents, Holley, And now depending on how many different versions of Holley software and stuff you have on your computer, you can have a different number of things here. But like, let's just say for sake of conversation, we're working in V6 for a Dominator. So you can click on that. And then now you can see these are the configurations. So like when you change your data monitor or something, ask you if you want to save it, this is the folders that those will go into. But for most people on a regular basis, you're going to be using the global files and the data logs. So click on whichever one you want there and you can find what you want. Another thing that you can do is if you right click within this, on Windows 10, you don't have to click on show more options. On Windows 11, if you go to show more options, you go to new folder and we can just give this a name. So now if we go into V6, we go to file, save global file as. If we click up here on the top, or you can just go over here on the left, go back to documents, Holley, V6, global files. Here's the folder we just made. And we can give that a name for that particular file and then just click because we don't have some stuff that's not pin mapped here. But whenever I tune a car, I set up a new folder within that whole same file structure, give it a name, you know, whether that's the customer's name, the car's name or whatever. And then as I'm tuning the car, I might save 20 different revisions. So if I make a bunch of changes and the car doesn't like it, then I can go back to the previous one. But if you keep all of those in their own folders, it makes it way easier than going back and having everything all within just the V6 folder, because then you can end up with, you know, hundreds or thousands of files in there and it becomes a big giant mess to try to organize all that stuff. So I'm a big fan of creating new folders for different things and then, you know, dumping the files into those folders. You just need to know where you saved that folder so that when you go to the save the global file, you can choose the folder that you just made. All right, I think we've covered enough for one video. Hopefully you guys have found something within this video that helped you out. And if you're interested in learning more about tuning your Holley EFI system, make sure you click on this video on the screen right now. Thanks for watching.